This is the current core player's handbook for the tabletop role-playing game known as Dungeons & Dragons. You may have heard about this through popular forms of media, such as shows. You may have found it on your own. You may be someone into board games and other quote-unquote nerdy activities that would have brought you in the realm of Dungeons & Dragons. I've been interested in this particular tabletop role-playing game since I was 13. I remember making my first character at that age, and I've yet to play her. But then I also vividly remember making my very first played character. This is actually art of her. She is what is known as a half-elf druid. I made her just over a year ago, and I spent months playing as her and getting to just enjoy this game. But I also very vividly remember the nerves of attempting to find somewhere to play, to find people to play with. And then came the fear of telling people, hey, I play Dungeons & Dragons, due to a lot of stigma that has been and still kind of relies around the game. D&D was created sometime before 1974 in the basement of someone named Gary Gygax and his fellow friend, David Arneson. In 1974, the first official edition was posted. The game has gone through many different editions and is currently on one called 5th edition, with a new one seen to be coming out very soon called D&D 1. Over 50 million people now play D&D, or have at least tried playing D&D. A number that's grown significantly in just a few years. However, the game is based off of your imagination and your entertainment. That is the core of the game. So it's always been set to include something called homebrew, which specifically focuses on your enjoyment and how you want to play the game instead of the rules of the game, which we'll get into a little more later. My information comes from Dungeons & Dragons Beyond, which is the official website for it, created and ran by Wizards of the Coast, which is the current party that owns D&D. It also comes from the Britannica, the Smithsonian's Magazine, a website called DM's Guild, and a website called 5e Tools. So let's look at how D&D started. As I mentioned, it was created by David Gygax, Gary Gygax, and David Arneson. They were two friends who found themselves sitting in one of their basements one night. David particularly had been going through a really hard time. He had lost his job. He was struggling with money. He couldn't find entertainment for himself, let alone his kids. He described it as he had cardboard. If his kids' shoes needed fixed, he used cardboard. And so they did what they could. They looked around, saw they had dice, cardboard, paper. And after a while of brainstorming, the first game of D&D ever took place. After some smoothing and polishing, Gygax formed a company that published D&D's first ever edition, called D&D The Original. Wizards of the Coast, which is the company that now currently owns D&D, is a subsection of Hasbro that bought the game in 1997, taking it higher than Gary ever thought it was going to go. He didn't even think it was going to ever leave his basement. The ever-climbing popularity caused the company to start producing more D&D things. They made books, such as the D&D core book I showed you, as well as books focused solely on campaigns and more. Minis, cards, maps, and prettier and themed dice. So this is a D20. It is called that because it has 20 sides. It is arguably the most important dice in D&D. It is what you roll to determine a lot of things. The rest of the dice just determine little bits like how much damage you do, that kind of thing. The minis and all the rest of that stuff aren't so important, hence why they came after. Fans also began making equipment such as dice towers, boxes, spellbooks, etc. to help increase their enjoyment of the game. Wizards of the Coast, I'll also call it WotC, began reworking and creating more and more content, releasing those additional editions. Now, let's look at the booming popularity of the game. Pop culture, TV shows, and internet access have all helped the role-playing game become more and more popular, and less stigmatized over recent years. Many TV shows have referenced the show in the game, some when the game was first coming out, such as The Big Bang Theory, That 70s Show, E.T., etc. Others, more newer, the most popular one of them being Stranger Things, a show set in the 1980s, who is focused on a group of friends that play D&D. It was so popular that WotC published an official Stranger Things one-shot, meaning it was made to just play once and be done with it instead of continuing for week after week. All these shows helped bring more people to the game. Shows have been made now purely set and based off D&D, not just referencing it. Some of these include shows on YouTube, such as Critical Role, an extremely popular channel, as well as others such as Dimension 20. They sit around a table, it's a group of friends, and they record their D&D sessions, and it's fun and entertaining. Podcasts such as D&D for Dummies, Dungeons and Dads, etc. have also helped contribute to this. And then came a new wave relatively recently of shows themed around D&D alone. Amazon Prime has released the first season of a show called Vox Machina, which is based off of a Critical Role campaign, and Mighty Nein, soon to be coming out, based off another Critical Role campaign. Matt Mercer, the DM of the homebrews, all of his settings, a lot of the stuff they encounter is made from him specifically. He uses the D&D core books and the rules set as the structure of the bones, and then he just keeps building. So, how do you play D&D? What is homebrew? Seeing the size of the rulebook I showed you earlier may have been a little daunting, but there's no need to worry. You only really need 4 things to play, and I could also make the argument you need less than that. You need you, a few friends, a set of dice, such as the D20 I have, a pencil, and a character sheet. A character sheet looks like this, and it's just going to house all the information for the character you have created to play. It's going to make it easier to keep track of. I could argue you don't need a character sheet. You can just use a piece of paper. You could use your notes on your phone. It's just easier with a character sheet. I could also argue you don't even really need dice. If you are playing with a group that is established, oftentimes they're going to have dice that they can give you, let you borrow for the session until you're able to buy another set. If you're playing with a group of all newbies, you may want to pick up the core rulebook I showed, as well as a setting book and a campaign book so you know how to run things, and a DM's guide if you're the one DMing. Anything else, like a dice box, tower, or minis, are just for extra flair. Among the group, one of them will be a dungeon, or also known as a game master. This person is like the narrator and a referee. They help to steer the game in its correct storyline, as well as the right direction they're wanting it to go. If you guys get confused, off track, don't know how to rule something, your DM will ultimately make that decision and tell you how to do it. The DM doesn't need to know everything, though. There are people who have played for decades and occasionally still need to look things up. The DMs play any character that a player isn't. These are called NPCs, including the villains. Everyone else is a player. There can be as few or as many players as the DM is comfortable with. Players make and are in control of one character in the campaign. They get to control this character. choose what they're doing, how they feel, how they react to things, what they're thinking. When making a character, you get a pick from a plethora of races and classes. Like my first one I played was a druid half-elf. Druid being class, half-elf being race. Each of them focus on something unique and give their own sets of advantages and disadvantages. The rest is simple. The DM tells you what's happening around you in your character. You tell the DM how your character reacts and their actions. The DM tells you what to do to accomplish that if required, what dice to roll, such as the D20. Everything that isn't included in the core rules, but your DM or another person creates and the DM finds acceptable, is called a homebrew. Rules for creating homebrew have been in D&D since the core of it. They are for all the things centered around making the game more adaptable for you. The DM guide I mentioned earlier is what houses the homebrew rules. That's why it's important to listen to your DM, what your DM decides to roll. Matt Mercer, the one who DMs for Critical Role, has made homebrew much more popular, so much so that his campaign setting has been fallen in love with. And WotC has decided to publish it in its own official rulings under Critical Role, but as official D&D content. So, if you ever have questions about anything not listed in the WotC rules, you can find forums and sites like 5e Tools and DM's Guide to help decide. Or, as the DM, you could simply just make your ruling. Just make sure you stick with it. So let's summarize. D&D is a fun and imaginative game that allows players to experience a fantasy world. Despite the daunting feeling, there are many tools that can help you, such as D&D Beyond, books, and simply Google. If you find yourself bored and wanting to try something new and creative, look to see if you can find a D&D game near you. All you need is you and dice.